here in America, things are always getting. Is it the media, or things seemingly always getting a little worse?
Is it you or are things getting worse? I think that a lot is happening. I think the pandemic is accelerating a lot of things that were slowly happening, and now it's just all accelerating in a very short amount of time.
100%. As so, I mean, obviously, a lot happens. Most of the media coverage this week has been on the Democratic National Convention. Was there anything that stood out to you from that?
Yeah. I watched Kamala's speech last night. I don't know if anyone else saw it. If you have, please respond in the chat with your thoughts. But I really liked it. I think she's a really strong speaker, and I found myself getting really emotional when she accepted the nomination. Just to see, a black slash, descendant of Indian immigrants accepting the VP nomination felt like a big deal. At the same time, feeling very, conflicted about her record when it comes to criminal justice issues. Um, so I don't know. I was really moved though by her speech, and I think she's a great speaker.
I mean, she
And
is
her
a great.
husband is Jewish. Little known facts.
Yeah, one up for the Jews,
One
right?
up for the Jews. Yeah, exactly.
But
Her kids call her stepkids. I think it's her husband's kids call her
Mhm.
Mamale, which is like the Yiddish way of saying mother, but her name is Kamala, so they called her Mamala. It's very cute. Anyway,
Works out.
yeah, checks out. But you
But
say you saw AOC and Bernie's speech. So what were those speeches like? I haven't seen them yet.
Bernie's speech was, very Bernie. Obviously he it was good that he reached out to his supporters, and he made it, very clear to them that given what Biden's doing right now, he is coming to the table and willing to negotiate. He sees that Sanders really did have a strong base, and so he has him and Sanders have appointed forces to really tackle the major issues that are of concern. So you'll see a lot of Sanders policies being enacted through Biden if
Yeah.
everything goes according to plan. Essentially was the message. And to just get behind Biden, because obviously, the alternative is Trump, and that just can't happen again. We cannot take another 4 years.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this because I'm seeing these things being posted on my social media, which is, Biden being attacked on the left for not doing enough when it came to like welfare reform in the 90s, criminal justice issues in the 90s. So being attacked on the left, and people still sort of rallying around the progressive left. And I don't know. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on, what how do we go forward knowing that there's just going to be these divisions in the left wing that really, could get amplified more and more as we get closer to election day?
Well, I mean, there is a clear difference between the Biden camp and the hardcore leftists, I guess now, the AOC, Ilhan Omar type of camp. But at the same time, as we talked about in previous shows, the public opinion is shifting more leftward just because of the polarization of Donald Trump and the polarization of politics during this time.
Mm.
So because of that, more and more leftist candidates are being elected to the Democratic platform. We're seeing a lot more Democratic socialists now on the Democratic ticket. And so slowly but surely, the party is shifting towards a more progressive direction. And I mean, regardless whether we go, center left or far left, any direction left is going to be better than, staying still or going backward. So,
Yeah.
take the victories as they come.
Yeah, I agree. I think to a certain extent, it feels a little bit like the people who are hammering Biden on the left, are I think that it's really easy to call people out on social media because they don't support your positions. But right now, Biden really has to be sort of a big tent Democrat. He has to take in the people who don't agree with Medicare for all and who don't agree with abolish the police. and he also has to get the votes of the people who want free healthcare for everybody, and who want to demilitarize the police. And I think that he runs the risk always of having policies that will appease one part of the left wing and then anger the other part of the left wing. But if he takes on policies that are too left wing, he's going to give more fuel to Trump to say, like, oh, look at this radical new direction that Biden wants to take us in. So I feel like he's always going to be boxed in to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, he does kind of have to run on some of the original platforms that he started talking about from the very beginning. But at the same time, I do like how, some of the super delegates still went Sanders' way, just so that they could express the message that Sanders still did have a support base. I think, the final count came to Sanders having something over 1,000 delegates, whereas Joe Biden obviously took the nomination with over 3,000. But the fact that Sanders, having dropped out of the race, 2-3 months ago, still took a fourth of the nominations is a strong message to those center left party members that, the far left does have some influence and it is growing in public support. So, those policies need to be pushed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think one thing that's not being talked about quite enough is this idea that if Biden does become president, he's going to owe quite a bit to progressive and far left policies and the people who voted for him. And so I think that might be a time to really, I think there could be, there could be a lot more politics that could be played if Biden becomes president, and he owes a lot to the people who put him there. So I think there's that possibility.
Very true. We'll see what happens come November.
We'll see what happens come November.
You never know.
I think we're now at day 72 until the election.
I think we're still at 75.
75? Okay.
I think whatever, 70 something. It literally can't come soon enough, to be honest.
I just want to say, it feels like it's going to be a short while, but I think in days before the election, every day feels like a year sometimes. Like I don't know if you remember the week before the 2016 election, but that just felt like a whole year, leading up to November 3rd.
And the thing was, we were naive at that time. Now it's a completely different reality.
Were we living together when the election happened?
I believe so.
Yeah. I remember when on the day of 2016 election day, I got onto the M train at Flushing, and a wave of relief washed over me, thinking I will never have to hear Donald Trump's voice again. I'm so happy I will never have to hear his voice again. So very naive.
Lo and behold, 4 years later, look at where we are.
Still have to hear his voice.
It's honestly baffling how, to this day, more and more keeps coming out about Trump. It's just scandal after scandal, to the point where the American public really has become just numb to it. Nothing I say about that person would surprise you whatsoever.
Right.
Which is kind of insane to say about a president. I mean, just recently, I think it came out that they found out that he actually did collude with Russia during the 2016 election. You know how that was like a huge, did he collude with Russia? Senate findings just came out like earlier this week. Yeah, he did. Big surprise.
Right. And there's no checks on him. Like, it can't be, it's not like he'll, a reporter will say to him, how dare you lie to us? And he'll be like, oh, my bad. He could just move on to the next question.
He just moves on. I mean,
yeah.
While we're on the topic, speaking of Russia, I did see a really interesting news story out of there. I think it was yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. The obviously, it's kind of crazy what's going on over there. Just a real quick recap of everything that's happened within the last couple of months in Russia. Putin is now going for another 20 years as president. He's trying to change the laws, and the leading opposition leader was just hospitalized. He was poisoned.
Yeah,
he was getting on a flight, and he was poisoned. Like, it's almost cartoonish, the villainry these days.
This is actually not the first time he's been poisoned. Navalny had a chemical thrown onto his face that turned his skin green, and he almost went blind. So this is not the first time that this has happened to him.
Yeah, so no democracy in Russia, clearly.
Well, so did you read at all about what's happening in Belarus with the protests? All the
Yeah,
people rising up and protesting Lodchenko, I think that's his name.
yes,
My dad's family's from Belarus, so
really.
I have to pay attention.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting story. Especially, I had a friend in college from Belarus. It's an interesting country that's known as Europe's last dictatorship. That guy has been in power, I guess, since the '90s, since like the Soviet Union times.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like, how is this guy still president? He's been president longer than you've been alive. So
Yeah.
like that very thought means, yeah, maybe there needs to be new elections. And the fact that he won by 80% of the votes, like, yeah, no, there does need to be protesting. There's clearly no democracy in that country. So I mean,
yeah, so we'll see what happens with these protests. It feels strikingly similar to maybe like the Arab Spring, where people are getting together online and a lot of different segments of society are coming together. And let's hope that it affects real change in that area.
let's hope so. I mean,
And maybe maybe it'll have a domino effect and maybe it'll have a domino effect in Russia.
hopefully so. We'll see if democracy reaches the Far East.
Well, on that note, let's please introduce our guest for today. We're going to be talking about mental health during COVID. I guess I think this might be a place like a trigger warning. Like if this ever gets to be too intense for people, maybe you could sign off and come back on. I was talking about this with a friend of mine yesterday, inviting him to the show. And he said that for his own mental health, he didn't know if he could participate in this discussion. So I just wanted to start on that note. But let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is Janelle Jones. She is a doctoral student at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and she's a nationally certified counselor. Welcome, Janelle.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
How's everything going with you, Janelle? How's COVID been treating you?
Things are okay right now. I am still in school, so the fall semester started Wednesday. So it's the first week of like online learning and back to the hustle and bustle of juggling things as a student and as an individual. And all the students are back in town too. So like the grocery stores are crazy. I'm just like, all right, what do I have in the freezer? Because I'm trying to avoid COVID by going to Publix. Like I don't want to go to the grocery store right about now. But overall in COVID, I will say, or throughout the pandemic, I have been fortunate enough to maintain my student job. And so finances haven't been insecure at all. And I've been able to kind of like pay my bills and get things done. So overall, I am well. But of course, as we're going to jump into tonight, there are mental health concerns and consequences of navigating a pandemic for any and everyone.
Yeah, and so you're also doing counseling work as well on top of your student work?
So I'm not doing counseling work this year, but I have in the past. So in this moment, no, I don't have a caseload of clients, which I would love to be doing. And thankfully I'm not doing, because there have been so many changes, not because I don't love my profession, but there have been so many changes in terms of navigating counseling online, which not all counselors have been trained to do. And so that's not necessarily a part of your graduate level coursework. You have to take like external certification courses. And so at this moment, I am not seeing clients. And it's something that I'm considering jumping back into. I have to like literally meet with my advisor and say like, hey, can we fit this into my schedule on top of all these other things that I'm trying to do right now? So we'll find out around like September whether or not I'm going to jump back into clinical work.
Okay. And I'm glad you said that, Janelle. And so just for the audience and people that may not be super familiar with how it works out, what is it exactly? Can you explain what exactly it means to be a doctoral student and counselor within education?
Yeah, so I am a third-year doctoral student in a counselor education program, which means that I am taking courses to further my knowledge on counseling concepts, theories, and multiculturalism, and all these other things that I learned during my master's program, but it's reaffirming those and strengthening them, taking it to a new height, new level. You're also all the while teaching. So I've taught classes to master's students. I taught a class to undergraduate students. Sometimes you're co-teaching and there's a professor alongside you kind of helping you navigate the course. And then sometimes you're teaching by yourself, which is optional. And then other times it means that I'm doing clinical work. My first year at the university, I worked at the University Counseling Center. So I had clients, which also was interesting living in a college town when I lived in a major city, I wasn't worried about seeing clients out in the streets. When I live in a college town, I'm like, I will eventually see you in the shampoo aisle of Target. There's one Target, like I will run into you. And so it's a balance, being a counselor, educator, student, and sometimes you're supervising students. You're involved in different counseling organizations and doing leadership roles. It's literally just juggling as many things as you can within this time, because you want to, well, at least me personally, I want to learn as much as I can because I'm paying for it. And I want to have as many experiences as I can that'll help me when I go out into the world and get on the job. And to fully encompassly answer your question, to be a counselor educator is to first identify as a counselor and then identify as an educator, knowing that you're going to most end up going into academia to do teaching and research. So you're doing your own work with clients, and then you're also teaching the next generation of counselors how to do work with clients.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you're multitasking and you have quite a bit on your plate.
Essentially, I'm Superwoman is what I'm
Superwoman, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can see that. Starting to get a huge picture of that. That's awesome. That's awesome that you can do all that stuff and still stay sane yourself.
I don't know about the last part, but yeah, sure.
But Janelle, I mean, given your experience, what are some of the most common problems you've personally seen during this pandemic?
Well, first and foremost, a lot of people lost their jobs, right? And that is widespread across the country, and was widespread across the globe, but specifically in America, people lost their jobs. And so some people have run out of money. The stimulus check wasn't enough for many people. Sometimes unemployment is not enough for many people. People are barely scraping by. Sometimes losing your job can also encompass a piece of identity loss, specifically for those that love what they do. Now, if you hate your job, you're probably like, oh, thank God. But if you enjoy your work, and like myself or others, you might feel like, okay, well, who am I or what am I doing if I'm not able to do this that I feel is my purpose, right? And so that's a huge mental health piece with the job loss, alongside of the financial strain and concerns that bring stress into people's life. Also, people have lost their healthcare as a result of losing their jobs. So medication may no longer be affordable. Mental health services may no longer be accessible. And so doing all of that in the middle of a pandemic where you're like, okay, not only do I not have work, but like if I get sick, what can I do? Right? It'll bankrupt me, or I won't, have my college tuition or whatever. So that's one of the huge concerns, job loss. Another huge concern that I've seen affecting people is grief and loss. So people have died, right? I think the number is like over 200,000 people have died of COVID alongside of regular normal deaths, right? Whether that's due to violence, whether that's due to aging, natural death, et cetera. So people are experiencing grief and loss. However, they're not being able to grieve in the way they historically would have, right? And so I had a family member pass during pandemic. It was kind of a concern of like, well, can we go to the gravesite? Can we have this church service? What does that look like? And one of the things I was actually mentioning to my mom was that I was thankful that we weren't of a different faith where there had to be specific rituals that we literally would not have been able to do during the pandemic, right? And so if I were of a Hindu faith and I believed in reincarnation, but I believed that this person had to make this pilgrimage in order to not be reincarnated in the next lifetime, what would that look like since we cannot travel due to COVID, since we cannot do this specific process in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so grief and loss has completely shifted and affected so many people during this time. Alongside that, there's just national heightened fear, right? Some people are like, you got the people who are like, I'll risk it all. I don't care. I'll go without wearing a mask. And then you have individuals that are like me and they're like, oh my God, why are you not wearing a mask? Right? Or you're concerned to go to the grocery store. You're concerned to go out into public places that you enjoyed or would have loved to frequent. But now there's this fear because we know that COVID is real. And as I just mentioned with grief and loss, people are dying. Right. And so you don't want to risk your life to go to the grocery store. On top of that, there's isolation. So individuals of different ages and different groupings may feel isolated. Those who have been bedridden for a while due to medical conditions, or those who have been in hospitals due to severe ailments, older adults who might live in retirement homes or live alone. There's restricted visitation in all of those settings, right? Because they're vulnerable populations, or immune systems might be compromised. And so what we're seeing is an increase in isolation of those individuals, which can lead to many things, whether that is depression, suicide ideation, etc.
Yeah.
We also know that kids are not having normalized socialization. They're not on the playgrounds. They're not in schools right now, mostly. Elementary school kids. It depends on what state you're in. But in the states that have sense, we're not putting a whole bunch of little kindergartners together. And at the same time, what does that mean for their social skill development? And then thinking about kids and childcare, we're now also seeing parents being stressed. People make jokes and are like, oh, look, you got to take care of your own kids now. And at the same time, what do we say to the parent that has to go back to work, but does not feel comfortable putting their child in daycare or some type of after school care program, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean for them, and them needing to provide for the family, but also still protect their family? So I could go on and on about the concerns of the pandemic, but those are just a few that are fairly common right now.
Yeah. When you brought up mask wearing, it actually made me think of something to ask you, because you're in a red state, unlike Jason and I.
Lucky
so
y'all.
Yeah. So I mean, do you think that? I mean, so many parts of this pandemic are actually being interpreted now as partisan. Like mask wearing, you could say, is now a partisan issue in the U.S. Social distancing, going to school in person versus online. Do you think that mental health and mental health services, seeking out mental health services, has become a partisan issue?
Oh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I wouldn't say that it is. I think one of the key things about mental health and mental illness and diagnoses, et cetera, unlike most systems in this country, it doesn't discriminate, right? And so you could vote a certain way, you can identify a certain way, and at the same time, depression is going to hit you in the face like a brick. So it really it's really based on the individual and what you believe. And if you have stigma attached to mental health or seeking mental health services, I don't think that's affiliated with any type of party, right? How you personally identify.
Okay. All right. I guess the question, I guess for me, it's interesting just to think about, like you mentioned, the fear or anxiety of the pandemic. But if you believe that there is no pandemic, that it's a hoax, then maybe you're not experiencing that same fear and anxiety.
Yes. And at the same time, you are still now put in certain states and certain businesses, right? Because they're all going to have different policies. You are now still being under the same restrictions as everyone else, which can still mess with you mentally. Because if you're a concert goer and all concerts have been canceled, right? Or if you're used to going to certain areas and they shut that area down, you're still affected. Even if you believe it's a hoax or not, you are still impacted by this. Now, whether you choose to believe in science is your own choice. No judgment here, but you're still going to be impacted, right? And it's still going to change your day-to-day life, which can still have negative ramifications on your mental health.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of the day-to-day, Janelle, can you just tell us what the day-to-day was like for you when you were counseling?
Yeah, so typically I would go in, the counseling center was open 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it's literally like an 8 to 5 job. The first hour was typically admin work. So you go in, you greet the secretaries at the front, the admin assistants at the front. They're hilarious. You make a little joke. You can go back to the break room, grab breakfast. There's usually breakfast there. And you use that first hour for administration. So whether that's you catching up on notes, you creating treatment plans for your clients, you scheduling clients, you're just sitting on your computer essentially for the first hour, which for me was real calm. Because I like to kind of get my mind right before I'm seeing clients, and get into that role, especially I'm a morning person, but I also need my coffee. So I need to sip a little coffee first before I engage with people. And so after that first hour, you'd have clients come in, and you would just be seeing clients back to back until your lunch break. Sessions were 50 minutes. And then you use that 10 minutes of that hour. So every hour you have a client. you see them for 50 minutes, the last 10 minutes, up to you. You can choose to write notes then, or you can kind of wait till the end of the day. I was an intern. And so like that hour at the end of the day that you would also have to kind of do clinical notes, I didn't really have that because I had to go to class. So I would use those 10 minutes to write notes, but also during those 10 minutes, you got to stretch, you got to use a bathroom. If your blood sugar is low, get a snack. I used to dance in my office to kind of get blood rushing. And so like I closed the door because we had like an open door policy. So everyone just kept their doors open in the hall. And I was just like, let me close this door before I twerk. So I danced real quick and I would check in the next client on my computer and then go out into the waiting room and get them. So you're just seeing clients back to back and then doing whatever you want in those 10 minutes. You do your notes. If anything needs to be brought up with your supervisor, I'm an intern again. So as an intern, I'm being supervised the entire time by one of the senior clinicians there. So I check in with my supervisor, kind of tell her like, here's what happened today, or, you know, I want to talk about this client issue the next time we meet. Mm-hmm. Once a week, I would have an hour of supervision with that supervisor. So we just go over cases and my progress and my counseling theory and things like that. So that was really the day in, day out. You go in, you do your notes, you speak to people, you see clients back to back, you keep doing notes until you clock out and leave.
Great. Do you have colleagues who are seeing clients right now?
Several. So most of my colleagues and friends that I met in my master's programs, most people don't go on into doctoral programs. So most people stop after they obtain their master's and they're working towards licensure, which is a 2 to 3 year process depending upon what state you're in. Yeah. But most are seeing clients right now. Most of my friends from my master's program are on the field, and a lot of them are doing telehealth. Some of them are still required to show up at their sites and engage with their clients face to face. But most are communicating via telehealth, which is counseling over the computer, kind of like what we're doing right now, or it can be over the phone.
And in general, you know, speaking sort of broadly, what, you know, when you have discussions about, if you have discussions about these clients, like what are people sort of contending with these days? What are they bringing into these sessions? Yeah,
so I will say, in terms of confidentiality, we don't really talk in depth about the client, right? So I won't know exactly like what's going on with their client. But from that counseling perspective, it'll kind of be how are you? How is it? What is it like seeing clients back to back? And instead of seeing them face to face, that's been a big transition for a lot of counselors because you're used to sitting directly across from someone. What is it like to then sit on a computer all day and you're staring at a screen all day?
Right.
A lot of counselors are joking like, okay, cool, at least I don't have to wear pants. Like they're trying to keep it lighthearted. And at the same time, it's different. It's a change for everyone and it's taking a toll on a lot of people. And so when we're discussing their cases, we're seeing a lot of clients having adjustment issues throughout the pandemic. A lot of clients are saying like, this is different and I don't like this new normal. And so it falls into the line of adjustment, which is not, you can diagnose it. And at the same time, due to the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, most clinicians are refraining from diagnosing clients with adjustment disorders because it's an adjustment for everyone.
Right. This is one of those interesting situations where, you know, both the client and the counselor are both undergoing similar circumstances. You know, maybe if you're my counselor and I'm going through a breakup, you know, you might not be going through a breakup at the same time, but we're both in quarantine. We're both having the same sort of circumstances. So it is interesting that this is one of those few times where both counselor and client are experiencing a similar sort of circumstances.
Yes. Which, I mean, I think there's, I don't want to romanticize it and say there's beauty in the uniformity of that. And at the same time, there's a new level of understanding, right? So whereas historically, I may not understand all of your aggression towards one of your parents, or I may not understand, you know, why this breakup went that way, and I can talk to you about that, but I do understand what it's like to sit in my house all day. I do understand what it's like to have fear about going to the grocery store. There's a different way of relating now that we all have this shared experience.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I'm wondering if you're hearing from these clients about sort of maybe the successes or the breakthroughs that are happening in quarantine right now. I think that there's I think that it's right to focus on sort of the negative of mental health right now in quarantine and with the pandemic and with our politics. But I'm wondering, in what ways has this time, through a certain lens, in what ways have you seen any successes or breakthroughs in terms of mental health?
So I'll speak from the perspective, not as a clinician, but just as an individual living in the world and being in therapy myself and knowing friends that are in therapy, and also, again, having clinician friends. A lot of people are tapping into spirituality, and a lot of people are tapping into coping mechanisms. And so in terms of thinking about presenting a strengths-based approach and thinking about how people are being resilient in this time, people are really figuring out, how do I navigate these things? How do I get through hardships? And then also acknowledging the fact that some of the ways that they've historically been coping or navigating troubled times isn't productive, is not helpful. And so the pandemic has given people a chance to kind of sit down, reevaluate, figure out what is working and what is not working, unless it is in the event of an emergency, right? The positive thing about the pandemic is that you do have time to sit, think, rethink, try out new ways of problem solving, again, unless it's an emergent situation where it's like you have to make a split decision. But it is giving people time to sit and think about the ways that they've coped. It's helping them identify new ways to cope. I will say that a lot of people are tapping into familial and friend support, whether that's via Zoom, phone calls. People are checking in on their loved ones now that individuals are more isolated or have to socially distance. There's a new way of connectivity, which is also very positive. I think it's somewhat of a silver lining.
That's awesome. I mean, and that obviously, Janelle, we have a lot of questions to ask you. But just given your experiences, I mean, is there one common theme that you've seen has been helping a lot of people? I mean, is there one, or maybe not one silver bullet, but are there some different coping techniques that you would recommend for anyone that is experiencing, mental health issues during this time?
So, biased statement, but I suggest people reaching out to a mental health service provider. That is a huge way to cope.
You're just paid to say that.
Right?
Yeah.
Literally, right? So reaching out to an individual who's going to have an unbiased stance and a supportive stance on helping you navigate such a troubled time can be very useful. And so I think that's a huge way to cope and navigate the pandemic. Is something that I've personally done myself. So I can also speak from that personal, not of do as I say, not as I, right? I literally have a counselor. Counselors deserve counselors, I think. And so reaching out to professionals is useful, but also, again, reaching out to the resources people already have, whether that is a family member, whether that is a really trustworthy colleague, a friend, and engaging however you can, whether that is via Zoom, over the phone, via text, over social media. There are different ways of connecting. People have been engaging in social distance meetups, depending upon their comfort level. So people are really leaning into their network, which I think is a wonderful way to cope and express feelings of frustration and bent and have shared growth. And you can also share your coping mechanisms with one another and say hey, here's what worked for me. What are you thinking? How has this helped you? Or what hasn't worked for you? So really tapping into your community as a resource.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a couple audience questions. So if you have a question for Janelle, you want to put it to this, to our guest, please ask it in the chat. We have a question from Susan asking, has the stigma of mental health across communities of color changed or evolved at all through these racial and health pandemics? For example, awareness, acceptance, openness to seeking help.
So there isn't statistical data to support that, right? There aren't, well, I'm sure people are working on it in studies right now, because a lot of researchers are like, how do I collect this data? Let me get all the, people are at home, let me interview them over Zoom or send out the survey. So the data hasn't been reported yet. But what I will say is, in terms of addressing stigma across communities of color and the evolution of it during such a time, I think based upon generational cohorts, it kind of depends, right? If you're open to mental health, if there's a stronger and longer lasting stigma towards mental health, As we know, historically, a lot of stigma towards mental health in communities of color has been tied to the Tuskegee experiments, medical experiments done on Black bodies, where they were essentially lied to by the US government and given false treatment. And so people have a huge mistrust of medical communities, which ties into psychiatry, goes over to psychology, counseling, all these other mental health.
Yeah, I didn't know that was, I didn't know that was sort of one of the legacies. That's interesting. It's the first time I've ever heard that.
Certainly, yes. And so the thing about that is only 2 generations ago, right? So my grandparents were alive and well as the Tuskegee experiments were occurring, and my parents were living towards the end of them, right? And so it's really 1 generation removed, honestly. And so, but that has a historical legacy, and people pass down fears to their children as well, stigma. And so I would say in the middle of this, what was phrased as a racial pandemic and our health pandemic in this moment, I think individuals are realizing there's a lot of stuff happening, right? And that is taking such a huge toll on so many people in different ways, right? Only it's going to be individualized to that person and whatever they're going through. But I think people are realizing that they can't keep it all in, or they're also realizing the way they historically coped with racial trauma or protest, or in our present moment, this health pandemic, they're realizing how I'm coping does not work anymore, or it's not enough. And so that's also where we see a lot of mental health providers coming in and saying like, hey, we're taking clients, we're open, we're receptive. You just also have to be receptive to us. You have to want to engage in the change process. No one's going to force you to come here. But we are here with open arms, willing to receive you whenever you do make that decision. I think that question brings up such a good consideration, in the point that one of the biggest things for me during the pandemic is not being able to engage in activism the way I would have historically. So some people don't feel safe at protests, or due to the racially charged times in states like my own, the red state, it's like, is this actually safe to go to? The fear of vigilantes or individuals taking things into their own hands. And so even with that trouble of figuring out, how do I navigate this change? How do I adjust to not being able to be the activist I would like to be? Something I could easily address in session with my therapist.
Yeah. Do we have other questions from our audience for Janelle? Any other questions about seeking out mental health services or mental health during COVID? That's still percolating.
Well, one question I did have, Janelle, going forward, like you said, I mean, people may be afraid to seek the help. Do you see what you're doing, or, I mean, counseling services in general, in the future being used as a kind of alternative to policing?
That's a very good question. So I would say that it is one of many alternatives that would need to be used in combination. And what I will say to kind of indirectly answer that question is, I can see it utilized as an alternative to incarceration, right? But not necessarily policing, in the sense that as a counselor, we can make house calls, we can show up on the scene, and we might be able to even show up alongside a police officer if there's a concern of safety or an emergency, things like that, alongside paramedics. However, we are not trained as counselors to restrain people. We are not trained and to jump into fights, right? And so like, I can have a conversation with a client who is in a domestic violent charged environment, but that doesn't mean I'm going to insert myself between that couple, right? And so, or like restrain the individual who is going to be the abuser. And so I don't know that it is a complete alternative. I think it's something that can work alongside. And I think it would be wise to do that more often, specifically as we are more trained to deal with the mental side of some of those emergent situations that police arrive upon, or they may not recognize, hey, this person is going through an episode, or this person is doing this because of this rationale, right? We're more trained to say, let's walk through this situation. Let's kind of unpack this, right?
Right. Which might be more sort of like restorative justice.
Exactly. And we're also not trigger happy because we're not trained on how to use them. So
right, exactly.
Like, no one's going to die if we show up on the scene. You know what I mean? So it might be a little better in terms of like public health and safety. But it is not a complete alternative, again, because we are not trained to insert ourselves. And I'm just going to be honest and very frank. I'm not going to insert I love my life. I'm not risking it. That's not my job. That wasn't my calling. That's not my profession. So I can show up alongside a police officer, or any type of safety check, paramedics, et cetera, suicide ideation. I can definitely be on the scene. But I don't think it's a complete alternative to policing. And then again, I think we need to be considering mental health services for those instead of individuals who have been judged and those that have been incarcerated. I think we need to consider mental health services instead of sentencing.
Yeah. I think we have time for just a couple more questions, but actually a question for you, Janelle, as well. This might actually be more of a personal question.
Okay.
But I started recently meeting with a new therapist, and so far all our sessions have taken place on the phone, because I felt like maybe I was sort of similar to what you were saying earlier, that I was getting tired of looking at a screen and having these sort of calls, and also wondering if, I was able to hide more with a screen interaction versus a phone, which might, make me more focused on the words I was saying rather than how I was presenting myself. But I'm just wondering, for you, do you think that there's other benefits to having a call like this where a counselor and a client are meeting on Zoom, or do you think that there's benefits to just keeping it off a screen and just having a telephone call?
I will say, with that aspect, in terms of navigating telehealth, there's a different power dynamic than it is in face-to-face, right? Because you're not in my office, you're in your home, right? You have these comforting things around you. This is your environment. Hopefully your home is a safe place where you can feel relaxed and calm, which can hopefully strengthen that therapeutic alliance and make you more comfortable. You might share things you normally wouldn't if you were in my office space. But I think in terms of doing telehealth face-to-face, a lot of things that counselors do, a lot of the work that we're doing in session face-to-face is reading body language, right? And so if I mention, let's say you had an issue with a family member, I mentioned that family member and I see you like clench up, or you cross your legs, or you're visibly uncomfortable, I can tune into that and say, like, what just happened? What's going on for you right now? Is this a subject we might want to come back to later? Is that an indicator for me to go further into that and explore why you are having that reaction? Versus if you're on the phone, I can't see your face. I might be able to hear your voice quiver if you're crying. And that's something I can visit, but I can't see your expressions. I can't read your body language. I can't see how open you are to discussing a specific topic if you're on the phone versus on the computer. I will say one thing from personal experience. I'm actually more inclined to give my counselor more eye contact over the computer than I am in person. So when we're touching upon hard subjects in person, I'm looking at the door, I'm looking at the tissue box, I'm looking around, and I might come back to eye contact every now and again, and there's studies on client eye contact as well. But when we're on the computer, I'm looking dead at my screen. Where else am I gonna be looking at? At my same living room closet? Like I'm looking dead at you at most times, and you can see me. And so that's been an interesting, unique thing, noticing the change in eye contact. But again, that piece of being able to visualize the client is really important.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll take that with me into the next week.
Yeah.
We have one last question.
Okay.
Jason, do you want to read it out?
Yeah, hold on just a second. It was from Susan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying this technology. I'm not good at it. Hold on. Oh, man.
I can read it. It's all right.
No, I got it.
Okay.
Finally, I got it. All right. Figuring it out. All right. Okay, here's the question from Susan. When searching for a new therapist, do you have any tips on finding the one? Are there any signs that someone may not be a right fit?
Okay, so that's definitely going to be individualized, right? And I feel like I keep saying that, but everyone has unique needs, right? And so what I might look for in a therapist is going to be completely different than what Susan might look for in a therapist. I would say when you are looking for the one, write out things that are important to you. For specific clients, we see this a lot in communities of color, specifically Black clients. People want therapists that look like them, which is also partially why I'm in the field, right? There's not a lot of representation. And I remember being in a master's program and not having Black professors. And so here I am on the other end of that, trying to change that.
Yeah.
But people are gonna look for people that look like them, people that might share the same values. There is Christian counseling. There are different counselors that practice different faiths or indigenous traditions. So if that's of importance to you, that's something you can look for. And thinking about the one you kind of want to, not that clients know counseling theories, but counselors, whether it's on their website or any type of counselor listing, it's going to typically say what their theory is, whether I'm looking more at behavior, maybe more cognitive, maybe at Lyrian. So kind of figure out what that is and what type of work are you willing to do. You might want exposure therapy if you've had trauma. It's going to kind of be based on what you're looking for through your sessions. You might have descriptions of counselors you like. So if you've been through, I'll give you an example of a cisgender client that identifies as a woman who may have been through sexual trauma with a male, does not want a male counselor, right? That might not be a good fit for you in that moment. You might be startled in session. Don't get a male counselor. There are tons of women counselors, right? And so thinking about the one for you is going to be based on what you're looking for in session and what type of personal attributes you might want your counselor to have. And there are various listings of counselors. Psychology Today is one of the most popular ones. So it lists out psychologists, counselors, and social workers. Most of them have photo uploads. You can literally see what this person looks like before you ever show up in their office. Because it's one thing to say, like, I don't want a male counselor, but then if you say, I want a Black woman counselor like myself, how would you know if I'm Black based on my name, right? I mean, you could be discriminatory and try to guess, but you may not guess that. So I don't know, but like there are listings of counselors where you can kind of see what theory are they operating out of, what type of work do they do with clients, if they are accepting clients, which is very important, because you might say, this is the perfect therapist for me, and they're like, my caseload is full, I'm not taking on anyone else, so sorry, come get at me in a year maybe, but you want to talk right now. And so that is one piece of finding the one. But then in terms of figuring out what's not a good fit, again, personal. If this person says, like, I mostly work with children, but I'll accept you even though you're like 52, it's like, oh, maybe you're not a good fit for me because you're used to specifically, not that client counselor couldn't, but that may not be a good fit for you, right? You also might want to think about that counselor in terms of figuring out a good fit. Are they helping you reach your counseling goals? If they're setting the agenda for you and saying like, hey, here's what you need to work on, here's what you're going to do, that may not be a good fit, because you could say, I don't actually want to work on that, or I don't really feel like visiting this type of trauma. I want to talk about this in the present day. If they don't let you lead as the client, that's not a good fit, because you are paying for a service. That's number one. But it is your mental health. And so if there's something that is more pressing in the moment, we don't need to be sticking to an agenda. I'll give you an example. Me and my counselor have therapeutic goals, is what they're called. We have therapeutic goals. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work on this. I want you to help me with that. A couple weeks ago, family member passed. I want to talk about my grief. I want to talk about my loss. I don't want to talk about this goal. This goal is not needed in the immediate present. I'm not crying over this goal. I'm crying over my loss. And so if you're unwilling to shift or adjust for my needs, you're not a good fit for me. Right? And again, fit is going to be individualized. I'm just speaking from my perspective. It's not a good fit for me if that counselor is not flexible and not meeting my therapeutic needs.
Wow, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Janelle. We'll unfortunately have to end it there, but thank you so much for your time. And so exactly, like Susan is saying, so helpful. And
thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
It was really great having you, Janelle.
Did we already say that you're both related? Did we already cover that topic?
I don't think we did. But hey, he's my brother.
We're gonna keep it all in the family with all our future guests.
That part.
Next week we'll be on with my cousin. Nice. Well, thank you so much again, Janelle. Jason, who are we speaking with next week?
So next week we will be speaking with some people based out of Oregon who actually have a weed farm. And we're going to be talking about, cannabis, how it fits in, today, the legalization process, and everything that's going on over there. So, yeah.
You
for our
will
cannabis
not
smokers.
want to miss that discussion, I guarantee you. So thank you so much again, everyone, for coming out today and for joining us for this really fascinating talk. My name is Adi Eshman.
I'm Jason Jones.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.